So what would happen if you took chess and D&D and combined them together? Well, you would have the world's best birth control. I'm kidding. Pop that on video game format and you would have Wargroove 2. Wargroove 2 is the sequel to Wargroove. Now, this game just came out last Friday. I've been spending all weekend and most of this week playing it, so let's talk about Wargroove 2. But before we do that, I have to ask you guys to please like, subscribe, do all that YouTube stuff. It really helps the channel out. It doesn't cost you anything. Plus, if I don't ask you, YouTube will come after me. Alright, on to Wargroove 2. So, this game is way more than just a story campaign type game. There is a ton of content to this game, so there's going to be a lot to cover and a lot of different modes to talk about. So, I'll talk a little bit about the different modes, but for the most part, I will be talking about the campaign, as that's where I focus most of my energy on and where a lot of my references from the reviews come from. So, for those not familiar with the first game, you don't really need to play it to play the second one. It does take place a few years after the events of the first game, and while there are references to the past, there's never this sense that you need more information to play this game. It's incredibly accessible to newcomers. Now in this game there are 6 different fractions, each told by 4 different storylines that play off elements of each other and then intersect towards the end. If you're following the storyline by difficulty, which is kind of the easiest way to do it, you'll start the game playing as the Fahari. They are like a nerdy librarian mouse group who are just obsessed with knowledge and research and truly live by the anything for science motto. And you first develop a real connection with the character Litra, as she is the one that you primarily control. And drama breaks out pretty early in this game, as the Fahari are on a mission to extract knowledge about their distant past. This is in the form of raiding tombs, essentially. Now, the biggest issue is most of these tombs and ruins are not on their homeland. In fact, they're just invading other people's countries and going through their artifacts. But they don't feel like that's a problem because they're doing it in the name of science. And this mission is led by Madame Pistel, who is the mad scientist type through and through. But as she gets herself locked into one of the ruins, she hands command to you, Litra. And Litra is incredibly meek, self-conscious, awkward, and heavily disliked by her own allies. But you don't have much time to think about that, as you and Litra both are put on a test as a battle awaits you. As a group of pirates warns not to be poking around in these ruins, there's something dangerous that could be released and they will not let you escape, so you must face them in hand-to-hand combat. And this is really where you learn how to play the game and learn how to be a commander. And the story really takes off from here, not only focusing on Litra, but also other characters that you meet along the Fahari lines. One that was really interesting to me was Romp. He is a badass, super powered mouse with a lot of power that in most strategy RPGs or RPGs in general would be like the militaristic kind of commando type. Now don't get me wrong, they can do a ton of damage as well as receive a ton of damage, but they're actually a pacifist and they go by they them pronouns. Just a very interesting take on this individual, and as you read more into the lore and play through the Fahari campaign, you really start to understand this character quite well. And just opposed to them is actually Madame Pistel, who you think is good-natured, a scientist, someone about research and knowledge, but this sort of thing drives her kind of crazy and takes you to some really dark places. And in fact, throughout the first campaign, I kept thinking, are we the aggressors? Like, are we the bad guys? And that's one of those things about this game that I truly appreciate, is it tells the many different sides of war, not just one side. And putting you in this position very early on in the game already sets a tone for what is going to be a main storyline. Nuance. There is very little black and white. There is a lot of gray. And I really appreciate them putting that in there so early on and giving you much more to think about than just beating bad guys. In fact, questioning yourself if you're the bad guy. Things like that, which are not really typical in a lot of combat war type games. And honestly, you wouldn't expect that from this almost childlike, cartoonish type game to have such a thought-provoking aspect so early on in the game. And that's not the only one, trust me. This is a relatively lengthy game with different campaigns, different fractions to talk about and their own stories. This one is just, like I said, the starting off point. This is the beginner mode. Once you get into the other fractions, things really ramp up. And rarely ever in this game is there a true bad guy, good guy side. Since you get to play as all the fractions, you understand their thinking and what they're doing as well, and how they're actually perceiving themselves as the good guy. And honestly, I think more games should do this, although I will say it's not without its faults. It's like going out to dinner and deciding you're not going to have an entree, you're just going to eat more appetizers. Everybody loves an appetizer dinner, right? You get a little variety of everything. The only problem is what happens if you find an appetizer that you really like? You want to eat more of, you want to experience that appetizer more, but you can't. It's just a small appetizer. That's all there is to it. And that is kind of the issue in this game, as you do become attached to a lot of the different characters and you want to see more growth out of them, you want to see what happens to them, you kind of don't. They're out of your control relatively quickly. Each campaign lasts about, I would say, 7 to 10 hours a piece, and then it's over. You move on to another fraction and you learn their story. It shakes things up and it keeps things fresh, but at times you want to stay longer with these characters, and other ones you don't really form a bond with, and you're fine with the story being short and sweet. But I will say the overarching story is amazing, and I absolutely loved it. Now, as far as gameplay, we're basically talking about combat here, as we only control our characters in a grid-based battlefield. I will say this is where it reminds me of chess a little bit. You see, there is a definite strategy to this, and it's how you move your characters. It's not really their abilities. They don't really have buffs or debuffs, not in the traditional sense anyway. You can pick up items, and some of the mini commanders, which are stronger versions of the normal units, they do have a few AoE buffs or debuffs, but it's very far and few between and very specialized. But your average unit doesn't really have anything besides attack. And that is something I see a lot of, and something I do miss when I think about the strategy RPG realm in general. I've complained about this a lot lately. There isn't a lot of actual combat strategy in these games as much as there used to be. And when I say that, I mean like the traditional buffs, debuffs, characters who can add attack power or defense or agility, things of that nature, to even the fact that there doesn't seem to be much magic and characters who are weak to certain forms of that. Now, to be fair though, there is still that rock, paper, scissors combat that we're all used to in turn-based combat, where your archers will attack far better against ground units, or your pikemen are going to do better against mounted units. Things like that are definitely still in here and play a huge part. Also though, positioning of your units matters a lot. You also can move them around, which is something that I found late game that really helped, was doing things like a pincer and different attack patterns like that actually really helped. I didn't really expect that to happen, and I was glad that it did have that layer to it, considering things like buffs or equipment was really downplayed in this. Although I will say the one cool strategy aspect about this game is resources, and in this there was some real creativity done. Things like lumber mills you could take over, and you could actually chop down the trees to gain money. And for me, the resource management, that aspect of this game is really where the strategy stood out, because understand that you have to capture a fort for you to be able to produce more of your allies. And same with your enemy as well. They need a fort. So the big thing that you need is fort and money. And if you deny that from your enemy by taking a majority of the structures, or you deny them a fort to be able to produce more allies, then you've pretty much cut them off, and it's just a few more turns until your victory. And that mechanic was featured in Advance Wars 1 and 2, and I really think it was almost perfected in this game just because of how you can utilize some of the structures, and it just seemed more accessible, and that was always something that was on the battlefield. As where with Advance Wars 1 and 2, it wasn't always the case. Sometimes it didn't matter, sometimes it did. I just like that being consistent in this game, and I really do like that turn to realism. Now, ultimately, I really like this game. I mean, there's not a lot to complain about, right? Like value, you spend like $20 and you get at least 40 hours of story. You get amazing writing, great dialogue, and that's just the campaign. I haven't talked about the other modes that are in this game, and I probably won't talk too much about them, but there is more to the game than just that. In fact, you can create your own campaign. campaign, which is insane, right? Like, they actually give you the tools to make your own game out of the game. There's also a conquest mode. There is a lot here, a ton of content for $20, and right now it's on sale for like $15.99. Well worth the value. That it's one of the highest scores I've had in value all year. Graphics are concerned, it's pixel art. It's not the best of the best. It's not the HD 2D. It's none of that, but it does what it does, and it does it well, to the point that you're still able to form a connection with these characters. Well, with the name like Wargroove, you know the soundtrack has to be banging, and it is. So many of the sound effects are also really great. A lot to appreciate there. Performance-wise, with a strategy RPG, you don't even notice if it has weak performance, but I can say that it never crashed, wasn't ever buggy, had no issues of that nature. So ultimately, this game is a huge recommend on my end. Arguably one of my favorites of this year, and I know there's been a ton of them that I've really liked so far, and most recently. And you know what? That's just good. That's just good for gaming. But I would say ultimately, if I had to give this game a score, I would give it a solid 9 out of 10. This game is just a lot of fun. It's really interesting. If you're even remotely into RPGs or strategy RPGs, this is a must pick up. Really great sequel to a really great game. Anyway, guys, that's my thoughts on Wargroove 2. Sorry if it was a little bit rambly. I kind of lost some of my notes on it, so I had to kind of go back just off the top of my head. But either way, they are genuinely my thoughts, and I really do appreciate all of you guys. You are amazing. Seriously, I cannot thank you guys enough for checking out the channel. I love each and every one of y'all. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.